Let me start this tape. Okay, the third alienation is personal esteem. People as individuals were secondary to the state. As time passed, the state became all-powerful and the individual became more and more insignificant. Pride in the state was accepted by pride itself was considered a threat to the state. So that's the same thing that's going on globally. So this book is so friggin' relevant if you can understand what processes were going on here. The fourth alienation was decision-making. Decision-making was centralized, and even such items as the time for harvesting came from Moscow. It did not matter if the commune was in the middle of a rainstorm. The day the order from Central was given to plow the fields, the workers were required to take the tractors into the field and plow. The people developed the 3.5 rule of thumb. They requisitioned 3.5 of everything. 3.5 tractors were required to plow a field. When I asked why, it was explained that if it was raining and the first tractor got stuck in the mud, they would get the second tractor. By the time the second tractor got stuck, it was hoped the rain would stop so the third tractor could get the job done. The half tractor was for extra parts. The 3.5 rule of thumb is found wherever the state centralized important decisions, which was almost always. The fifth one was personal ownership. The state owned everything. Individual ownership was not allowed, and even if exceptions did occur, and the social pressure against such ownership was overpowering. The word for private business was the same connotation of the word for mafia in America. And that's sort of the same thing that's going on with our corporate world. We're being run by the corporate world, and the corporate world is owned by these elites, who the elites are like, owning everything. They own they're going to be owning all of the water, all of the farming. Every single thing is going to be owned by the leadership. So, you're looking at communism that's trying to sell itself as socialism with this New World Order. It's the same friggin' game. The sixth alienation is political initiative. Individuals were not allowed to initiate policy or political programs. This was up to the government. All political action was under central control from Moscow. Political positions were filled with hand-picked people who adhered to the party line. Same thing that's going on in every other country. People were not permitted to conduct, this is the seventh one, is private enterprise. People were not permitted to conduct private enterprise. All manufacturing and distribution were under the total control of the state. More than 16 levels of taxation exist, so that if one made any profit from an enterprise, the total tax owed was almost 120% of the money earned. That's basically where we're headed to now. But it's like you got to see that government is not really government. Government is corporate. Obama is just a representation of the corporate world, the shares, stocks, and bonds that corporations own. They don't want to say that you're being controlled by communism, but replace communism by a corporate world, and you'll see this game is exactly the same. I'll continue reading. It soon became obvious that under communism, the Soviet society attempted to create the largest closed information system ever devised in human history. Our focus in the Ministry of Social Problems began to zero in on the nature of closed information systems. We discussed how the collective system of government under communism was, in so many ways, different from the capitalism democracy. The discussion led us through different aspects of social structure and function. In the Soviet Union, money exchange was regulated according to the system of credits. that were awarded for services rendered. This allowed the larger systems of society to fund their projects. The individual was a separate thing. Each person was paid a certain amount of rubles per month. To me, it looked as though the entire population was participating in a state-controlled dole system. Each person lived in a similar flat. Each had equal access, theoretically, to the resources of the nation. The leaders of the Russian space program, in theory, got the same pay as the factory worker. Manufacturing and businesses was managed by the military, and all received equal pay. So it's, can you see that it's sort of like a free society where everything's the same for everybody else? That's not what we have now, but that's what the New World Order kind of wants to do. At the same time, I'm in agreement with that, because there's no, it's slavery if you have two-tiered systems. This is an equal system, but it doesn't function right. But if you have a profit system, that also doesn't work, because it's slavery. So it takes a completely different mindset to be able to see that all of these systems have never worked in our past. There's no country that has ever developed any kind of system that actually functions and works properly. But understanding this system and how it didn't work, how our corporate system doesn't work, you might open up your mindset to what would work. Those at the ministry understood the difference between an ideal world of social order and reality. They also understood the price their society was paying, even though social order was stable. We talked in detail about how, in order to enforce state-controlled policies such as the 7 areas of alienation were initiated, because, they explained, the masses do not willingly give up their individual rights. But look at the price, I almost screamed. Look at your workforce, I pointed. As a result of these 7 areas of alienation, individual initiative has almost completely stopped. They nodded in agreement. I continue to drive home the cost of their alienation of human rights. Motivation to work has diminished to where over 70% of your people who are capable of working have stopped making a productive contribution, I said. They are on the dole system, and this country is going broke. They realize the problem. I kept coming back to the issue. The country cannot sustain itself with only 25% of their working population. The people who are capable of making a contribution toward the workforce are actually not holding down jobs. I said that the discussion then took a new direction. The director asked, what can possibly be done to change such a system? Now, again, this Dr. Wolf has a tool that can solve all problems known to the human experience, but he also has issues. He does not use this tool to solve problems for himself. While he was trying to do all of this, he was poisoned with high-grade uranium, because obviously somebody had a say that he didn't want to listen to. I find that that's what this Dr. Wolf is like. When I phoned him, he wanted to change my ways of thinking. He was completely closed-minded to hearing somebody else. And that's where I think, if you're going to talk about an open system and that we are individuals and each individual has the right to be heard, that plays a role in how we're supposed to redesign this whole system. And I don't think that this Dr. Wolf kind of gets that one. But anyways, I'll continue. For 10 days, we outlined in detail how the new sciences of holodynamics could be applied directly to the problems inherited within the communist system of government. We explored deeply into the holodynamics of human consciousness. The holodynamics of human consciousness. Within the Ministry of Social Problems and its staff, we reviewed their own plan for counteracting the 7 areas of alienation. Their approach was, in my view, totally inadequate. It consisted of a series of half a dozen role-playing situations that they hoped would influence people to become more productive. Their hope was that by some initiative process, the people would grasp that change was up to them, not the state and not the government. We had quite a confrontation on that point, but to put it briefly, I suggested that change of any type in consciousness began at the macro or micro and worked into micro. I agree with that point. It's got to be us, the people, that make the change, but one of the rules is we all have a say. But we all are right, so we have to figure out what's right, but we all have an aspect of something that's wrong. So we all have to admit that while you go to a peace table, that you could be wrong at something, but you're right at something. That is my insight. Finally, at their request, I outlined in some detail the principles of the holodynamic consciousness programs on the presence and unfolding potential, and demonstrate how to transform holodynes. We discussed the issue of history, time, and consciousness, and how to transform the past and pre-live the future. They admitted they had never considered such possibilities, and furthermore, they could see no way to get approval for implementation in the immediate future. In other words, they felt incapable of training their people in implementing any feasible solution. Thus, by default, an informal agreement was made. The Academy of Holodynamics was assigned the job. The Ministry of Social Problems agreed to give what support they could, but in tumultuous times at hand, they hoped the seminars of holodynamics would best be launched on a private basis throughout the Soviet Union with the blessings of both the government and the academies. This is how the holodynamic seminars began. In the holodynamic seminars, we taught three approaches to physics and reality: particle, wave, and presence. When taking together these three elementary forms of reality compose the whole dynamic of holodynamics of reality. These three forms of reality were then followed by three dimensions of consciousness: particle consciousness, wave consciousness, and the consciousness of presence. Depending upon which dimension a person used in viewing reality, it could be used as particle, wave, or presence. Solutions to problems, I said, are always found in the whole dynamic of presence. When we looked at the history of our view of reality, we can see that classical physics is linear. It is particle thinking. Quantum physics, on the other hand, is, by definition, the study of wave dynamics in an energy in motion. This is nonlinear thinking, such as in emotions or emotions. Presence, on the other hand, embraces both types of thinking and then moves us beyond the particle and wave dynamics into the whole dynamic, where reality is unfolded with multiple dimensions in consciousness, and thus solutions became more obvious. For simplicity, these three views of reality were used to explore consciousness from different dimensions. Every process was based upon some aspect of the new scientific information regarding reality and the new science of consciousness. We began with the three forms of matter: particles, waves, and presence. Okay, I'll get into that in another tape. Three forms of matter is what I'll get into next. It's going to start getting into some good things. While I'm reading any of these books, there are some things that I personally see are not in this book. And a lot of that came when I realized what makes things happen. And although this transforms problems into solutions, you will still attract what's inside you. This really does help change you, what's inside you, but I don't think that this guy himself, the author, quite understands where the first lie is. It's like you gotta kind of understand what needs to be transformed in order to transform it. You have to know what the unknown problem is. And that's why this bottled intentions works so perfectly with this type of science. You have to use both. Even this guy admitted right at first that it was something that makes an awful lot of sense, but for some reason he sees me as his enemy. I'll do it on another tape. Peace